I had the pleasure of speaking with Vrijen, co founder and CEO of the AI based career coach, CareerSpan. In this discussion, Vrijen breaks down the biggest issues in today's job market, how to effectively create a resume to break through the ATS, as well as the complete disaster that is LinkedIn. I truly have not had a more insightful conversation in regards to these topics, and I truly hope that it provides value to you all. Thank you all so much for your support. What do you believe are some of the biggest mistakes candidates are making in today's current job market?
There are so many little things, and I think that's unfortunately sort of the problem nowadays is that there's a combination of sort of big and little things that could be working against you. I think my biggest pet peeve is this overly aggressive applying culture that has emerged. I think it's worst when it comes to using auto apply, when it comes to using easy apply. I think those approaches fundamentally misunderstand what it is that gets you selected in a competitive job process. So, what do I mean by that? Think of it in terms of like points of difference or like points of comparison, right? If I'm easy applying, let's say I'm easy applying on LinkedIn. What am I really submitting? I'm submitting my LinkedIn profile, which maybe they'll see, maybe they won't. But they're going to get this very distilled version of who I am that doesn't really set me up for success, right? It doesn't really let most people shine. And especially if you aren't in the sort of top 5% of candidates, let's call those the lucky ones, right? I'm not talking about deserving or not. I'm just saying they got great profiles. They don't have to work too hard to persuade people that they're all that. You could look at their resume and their profile sinks. Most of us aren't like that. I myself am not like that, right? I think most people aren't. Most people would raise questions. And so this auto apply culture leads to folks just spamming applications, not really orienting themselves towards that job, and therefore not showing the best possible aspects of themselves for that job. It is sort of, just tossing your application into, another in the pile. And it's just that the competition nowadays is so high, and the bands by which they're assessing people are so tight that unless you really line up with the job in the ways that you are being tested, leaving aside whether they're fair or not, you're not going to get called back. So that would be the main thing. And again, I spend so much time emphasizing it because I think it's very easy for folks to feel pressure, to feel stressed, to think, I got to make progress in life and on my job search, and therefore to respond by trying to make the number go up, right? It's a very natural psychological effect, and it tends to be unhelpful. It is, for most people, more likely that the direction you should go in is applying to fewer places more thoughtfully, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Especially when, we hear 75% of applications are never even seen by a human. So it's just getting flushed out by the ATS system. And then you're actually kind of depending all of your, everything's based on whatever the recruiter is going to be feeling for that day, if they're even going to look at it. What I would assume is that something that I haven't heard discussed as much, it seems a lot of the discussion is about the resume. What about a cover letter? I would imagine that a cover letter provides quite a bit of input, not only in putting keywords in for the ATS, but also for gaining that attention from the recruiter. What are some tips that you have for creating an effective cover letter?
Great question. So I myself have flip-flopped on this. I think you'll find, a lot of hot takes on the issue of cover letters, but I myself think that, in a very specific situation. So, to be accurate, cover letters can help, and I think they can help in some specific situations. If you are making if there is a big question mark of some sort in your profile, then a cover letter can help. So, for example, if you have a large unexplained absence, or you're making a pretty drastic career change, or let's say there is you're applying for a job and you don't have any traditional experience with the job, but maybe everyone in your family does that job. You have a lot of sort of secondhand experience with. You have this sort of like personal connect. So basically, there's this sort of extenuating factor that isn't reflected in your resume, and that's a really important point. I think where a lot of people make a mistake, and a lot of people do this with ChatGPT, is they will basically just repeat their resume in the cover letter. And I personally think that is like, job applications unaliving, essentially, is what it is. And that's because you are basically annoying the crap out of the recruiter by basically repeating things that they have either just read or are just about to read, right? It needs to be new information. And so that's where it sort of has to be either, there's some question mark or some unexplained factor that you either want to elaborate on, or you have some connection to the company and you really want to get that out there, or you have some deep connection to the underlying, but you want it to go above and beyond your resume. And you also want it to be relatively tight. 300 words. Do not ramble. This is not an opportunity to, again, the tendency is to really sell yourself. And so, all of us are feeling not so great emotionally and sort of, feeling insecure and really wanting to emphasize why we're worth paying attention to. And that can lend ourselves to like being really wordy. And I myself have done it. But again, set yourself that limit, 2 or 3 short paragraphs that emphasize new information. And I think that's really how you use the cover letter to stand out. The last thing I'll sort of say, and I think to your point, the meta has shifted. We used to go from everyone needs a cover letter to there are so many cover letters that cover letters are pointless to now my feeling is that people think, oh, don't submit a cover letter, in which case when you do and it's actually good, my feeling is you can stand out. At least that's sort of my hot take, right? Like I said, everyone has one. So I would agree with you. I think a well-written cover letter, short, punchy, gives them new information that draws an authentic connection between you and the thing that you are trying to do. Is the mark of a highly effective cover letter. And then obviously, in addition to that, naturally use AI or your own writing skills to make it just effectively communicated and well written as well.
Just on the discussion of keeping the cover letter tight, I've heard, at least from my adult career, is that you want to make sure that your resume is one page. Sometimes I feel like, especially if you start to do more in your career, it's kind of hard to come to compact all of those into one page without maybe selling yourself short. Is that still accurate? Is it important to do one page? I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that.
I don't think it's important to do one page. I just think you gotta be real with yourself. Like everyone in that situation needs to be real, right? Like the individual that's trying to make it 2 pages needs to be real about, is this 2 pages of fluff or is this two actual legitimate pages? I think that's just, a conversation that is between you and your creator, and that's how it has to be. I think beyond that, like I think a reasonable recruiter will look at that and say this person clearly has achievements that are relevant. And I think that's the standard you should hold yourself to is, is it just if you're doing it just because there are things to say and not because those are the best things to say, then save yourself the words because all you're doing is shooting yourself in the foot, right? You are candidate X out of 100 that they're reviewing today, and every unnecessary word that you make a recruiter read is a word they will hold against you, is my opinion, right? So the point of being concise and precise and tight is not so much like, for the essentials of good writing. It is because these folks are like overworked, and the more punchy you can be, the more they'll appreciate you. And so that's sort of where you come from, right? And that also, I think the last thing I'll say is this sort of speaks to a larger point, which is everything about how you put yourself forward is an opportunity cost, right? When you have 300 words in your cover letter, you have to decide, do I put in thing A or thing B? And I think oftentimes in this discussion of like how tight should something be, we forget to just tell people, hey, at the end of the day, you got to pick, and it's okay to pick, right? There's a good chance that you actually have two great things about you, and it's perfectly fine to say either. So the last thing I want to say to your audience is, on some level, just don't overcomplicate it. Find a good thing that connects you to that org or that line of work, or that highlights a special reason why you're qualified to do that thing. Pop that on, move on with your life.
One of the things that I found really interesting, especially when we're talking about you have to make a choice, is you did a presentation about 61% of employers say the best way to be able to have your resume be effective is if you actually curate it for the job you're applying for. Now, that sounds obvious saying it. That's not actually something that I've heard before. I think a lot of people think, well, I'm just using a resume that has my skills and it should be applicable for the jobs that I'm applying for. Do you mind elaborating on what what are recruiters and employers specifically looking for within a resume, and how can you curate it to best suit their needs?
No, this is such a good question. I mean, you're seeing me getting fidgety. Like I think this is such an important question. So okay, the intuitive thing to think is exactly how you described it. It's how I used to think about it. I think it's how most people think about it, which is that I have the things about me that are worth saying. I'm going to put those on a resume, and then hopefully that will sell, right? And we enter it with that frame of mind, which is why it's extra soul crushing when it doesn't sell, and the equivalence in your head is therefore the thing that I have to say about myself is worthless, right? So anyway, that's a whole separate discussion, right? But that's like how we sort of perceive ourselves. The reality is you actually and all of us, we sort of exist as this amorphous cloud of skills and experiences and competencies, and for any given job it's just a matter of what slice of that you are showing to the employer, right? Like we got all sorts of sides to ourselves, right? I'm a great cat dad, less relevant to my job as a CEO, although you would you would believe there is some overlap there, right? But less relevant than you would think. But there are other skills that are highly relevant. So I'm talking, what is the most relevant slice of myself? That's how folks should think about tailoring, right? I think another problem with this idea of resume in one page is, and I was making this in the notes today, is it leads to this like one page blindness, right? It leads folks to think of themselves as limited by that one page. Because you always think of yourself as, oh, I have to exist within this one page, and therefore all I am is contained by this one page. And so actually the advice we give folks is start with a master resume, right? Or at least have one document that is your master resume that is literally every single resume bullet that you could possibly say. Anytime you come up with a new resume bullet, drop it onto your master resume list, right? And you want to keep that, sort of like index almost of like things to say about yourself, because well, for one, it is a good way of sort of representing or showing yourself the totality of who you are and starting to see yourself not just in terms of that one page, but in terms of, what are all of the things I bring to the table in my jobs? Because those are the things that you should have a grasp of. And then, from there, you should hone in on the stuff that's relevant to this role that you're specifically looking at, if that makes sense. So yeah, I think that's the whole point of tailoring. And so the idea is that you take the job description, you identify what kind of responsibilities they're looking for, and then you look into your background and you say, okay, what are times that I've either directly or indirectly done this thing? And then are there resume bullets that reflect the fact that I have done this thing? And then you want to, essentially just try to have as much coverage as possible. So by coverage, I mean, you want to ideally have at least one, if not more, resume bullet that directly addresses every responsibility on the job description, right? Just easy sort of rule of thumb to think about it, right? If they want someone that exhibits project management capabilities, you want to look into your background and say, all right, what's the last time I managed a project, right? And let me pull a resume bullet out about that, and let me make sure there's a one-to-one sort of pairing there. But it is so important because what I like to tell folks is, they will look at your resume for 5 seconds to decide whether they want to read it for 30 seconds. That's how tight it is, right? And so
Mhm.
you got to have your stuff be really punchy. So in that first 5 seconds, they aren't going, not really, like kind of just seems generic, not really tailored, harumph, toss it away. And I kind of, recruiters can be really the bad guys sometimes, but I kind of get where they're coming from, and then, that's the end result. So anyway, that's the long spiel for why but again, it is so important because it is one thing that recruiters universally agree is something that they look out for.
I think I want to take it down just a notch because something that we were talking about off screen is it's very hard to elaborate on what skills you do have. I recently had someone ask me to create a bio for them for a podcast that I was on. And I sat there for about 45 minutes and could not think about what to write. And so I went to ChatGPT and I said, "Do you know who Damon Cassidy is?" I said, "Yes," kind of gave me like a little sentence of me, which was kind of crazy to see. And then I said, "Do you mind creating a bio for me, kind of explaining some of these things in a little bit more detail?" And what it provided was it was perfect. It was to the T. I couldn't believe how well it elaborated on the skill sets that I would have wanted to be able to say. So, kind of a long statement there is the company that you have is trying to allow individuals to see the skills that they do have. Do you mind sharing and elaborating on what is CareerSpan and how is that putting the power back into the candidate's hands?
Yeah, thank you so much for drawing that connection. I mean, you're so absolutely right. I think you point out a real flaw in what I was saying earlier, which is that, there is an inherent challenge in what I'm describing, right? Looking inwards, really honing in on what are my best attributes, what are the things I should be saying about myself. Should I be talking about thing A or thing B? Those are genuinely really difficult things. And one of the things that sort of led me and my co-founder Logan to start CareerSpan and to work on this company was our experience as career coaches, and was actually our experience as really sort of high level career coaches that were able to work with some very sort of high achieving and sort of very affluent kids. And what we realized was that the work we were able to do with them was so high impact, but the differentiator wasn't some sort of amazing talent we were bringing. It was purely the fact that they really had the resources to have someone be available to them, right? Someone to listen to them, to ask them good questions, to help them refine their thinking, right? It's like we were doing the cognitive heavy lifting for them and helping them self-reflect in an assisted way. And that was leading them to sort of realize these things about themselves much more easily, much more quickly, much more effectively, right? And so that's really I would argue, the utility of a really great career coach. Now, I recognize not everyone can afford that, right? And so that's what sort of led Logan and I to work on CareerSpan and sort of premise our entire product on these AI coaching conversations. They are sort of, the product is a overall sort of career development platform is what we're working towards right now. It helps you essentially apply for jobs and get jobs more sort of easily and effectively. And more specifically, it helps you with developing your professional story, right? Because as you said, identifying what to say about yourself, how to put that together, how to present that in a sort of cohesive, coherent way, that's the actual challenge, right? That's the actual holy grail. It's not, jumping on a chat GPT and asking for a resume bullet, although that is totally very helpful. It's actually the step before that, right? Which is what goes into the resume bullet, right? What do I tell ChatGPT that it then uses to create that? And so that's sort of roughly how our tool works. You upload your resume, you identify a target role, and it will actually, it'll actually draw connections between your background and the role, and it'll suggest things that you can discuss with the AI or that you can talk about to actually develop these talking points. And so that's sort of our philosophy: is how can we, assist the person in thinking about themselves more effectively, just like we used to assist our clients in our previous lives.
How did you guys create something that is really trying to put that has an AI almost on the side of the candidate? It really seems like the first product I've used that wants to serve the individual.
I think it is a little bit of use case thing. I'll give OpenAI a ton of benefit of the doubt in that, they're making a general purpose tool, and it's almost like, the analogy on the more techie side of folks, I've just to again give them a little bit of a benefit of the doubt, would be like, if they're making stock Android, we get the benefit of making like an Oxygen OS, or like, a more catered sort of like version of Android for a particular phone, which is to say that we get to have the AI conversational experience be a little bit more suited. And in this case, one of the things that we really emphasized in the sort of prompting architecture that we set up in this sort of middle layer, is really an emphasis on like, hey, the higher order purpose of helping the candidate is to like, be honest with them, be blunt with them. I mean, there are like literal points in which we tell the AI to sort of, be critical, or to be, we'll like tune it to sort of be stricter about certain things. And I think that just comes with, again, the belief that, I think one of the things that I'm really proud of about our company and sort of helps us stand out is that we're actual coaches, right? We're folks that have really worked one-on-one with folks, really understand what it means to bring out the best in someone and bring out their best story in someone. And because we come from that world, unlike, a lot of other companies out there. The founders of this company have actually done the coaching. I think that makes a big difference in what we see as sort of our priorities and obligations to our user.
Absolutely. What I found interesting too was in another presentation that you gave, and it was something that I found after this was I felt like I had the skills now to be able to articulate what it was that I wanted to say after I had used CareerSpan for a while. But something that it didn't even occur to me was that what you and I are doing right now is we are speaking in, almost, how many miles away from each other and different time periods and everything. And typically, 2 decades ago, one of us would have had to fly to the other person to be able to talk, or you were going to have to go somewhere to have an interview. I think that's something what we're seeing a lot is Gen Z aren't even turning the camera on whenever they're doing interviews, and that's not to be saying anything about Gen Z. I think it's just people that it's a new tool that they're not exactly able to understand. How do you do this effectively? It's hard to look into a camera, especially when your face isn't right here. Your face is over here. So it's hard for my eyes to track to try to be professional. What are some tips that you have not only for being to translating those skill sets you learned from CareerSpan into an actual interview to actually saying it out loud, but also doing it in a digital setting?
Gotcha. Okay, so there's a ton of big and little things that I have to say on that. Let's start with some table stakes, right? And this is coming from someone that, to put it mildly, has sort of like organizational, challenges at times. I could be a lot better at that stuff. And so knowing that about myself, one of the things that I try to do, especially for, a day like today, podcast appearance, say interview, I would say falls in the same tier of importance, is have like a checklist, right? Have like take a little bit of time, establish your setup. Like, over the winter, I sort of like sat down in my little nook. I sort of like fixed the camera angle. I like lined a couple of things up. I adjusted the brightness. I got a light bar. There's a couple of basic things that you can do. And look, nobody comes out of the womb knowing these things, right? My co-founder still to this day laughs because the first interview I did with her, which she was actually my second boss ever, so she hired me for a job long before we started working as co-founders. And I remember doing that interview in like I in a dark, like I'd never really done a digital interview before, so it was just I was like in witness protection, and she was just so those are kind of table stakes. I think beyond that, one tip that's really helpful for me is to open up a sticky, pin it to like float on top of other windows, and then set it to right below your webcam on your laptop, and then either have notes there or just even set the sticky there so that your eyes and like set it to like a color like pink or something that's eye catching. And so then your eyes are naturally pulled towards the camera, which I should have done today, but like, is just something that, occasionally I've done. And that tends to be quite helpful to like guide your eye line back towards the camera as well. I think beyond that, really though, the challenge with interviews really boils down to how confidently you can tell your story, which again just relates to a lot of the stuff that we already discussed, right? Is sort of taking that time to look inwards and really feeling confident that you can put yourself forward in a sort of dynamic and kind of, you know, relaxed way.
How important is it? I got criticized in one of the videos I did that a firm handshake and like a good suit or a good shirt is still important. I had much older, grew up with older parents, went into a bank setting with much older people. My profession, everything I've done has always been with much older individuals. So I kind of have that. I still think that that's important. What are you seeing? Is that still an importance, or is it more about how you can communicate? What are some of these other things besides maybe just the skill sets that one can offer?
You know, I uh I think that in the conversation about what folks should do or what is acceptable, it's sometimes easier, and I'm speaking purely to candidates at this point. Um, in that conversation, it's sometimes easy to forget what is most helpful to our cause as individuals. And so, I'm a very like casual person. Like I will curse around my team. Like I'm, fairly chill with my language. Like I really, in many ways I'm like incredibly laid back. But then at the same time, I like to like show up in a collared shirt to work every day, right? And so like, there are different contexts in which we decide how much formality with which to present. I would say for entry level candidates, the reality is that the job market, you are like a taker, right? You don't have the power to dictate terms to employers. And I don't say this to say that it is a fair or reasonable system, purely to say that like in that kind of an environment, it's probably most advantageous for you, even if you think it's utter crap, to adhere to the protocols and the formalities, right? Because your worst case scenario is that you are formal and you come across someone like you and me that may not care, may like not note that you're in sweats or something, but may not ultimately care. That's not your worst case scenario. Your worst case scenario is someone that sees that and immediately dings you, right? Whereas if you had worn a suit or sort of whatever the equivalent is that you would like for whatever you'd like to wear, your worst case scenario is sort of capped, right? And so I know it's a little bit of an annoying point, again, like I said, or otherwise just start your own company like I did, and then you can do whatever you want, right? Or start your own YouTube channel, and then you can show up to work however you'd like.
Yes, I am a big fan of the collared shirts. Do that in every one of my videos. I try to look quite professional, but I do have sweatpants on right now too. So I
Yeah,
got the
yeah, it's okay.
best of both worlds.
I got those stretchy Lululemon ones. I invested in
Yes.
those. Yeah, no,
Yes.
totally, totally.
When we're talking about the bias of recruiters, I think there isn't a platform that caters more to the recruiter and their biases than LinkedIn. Um, I have already critiqued it heavily. That's actually how we connected, was from that video. I would like to hear some of your thoughts on LinkedIn, as well as what CareerSpan is doing to solve some of those issues.
Okay, so I think with LinkedIn, it is very important to remember who LinkedIn is really for and what LinkedIn can realistically do on its best day, right? So who is LinkedIn really for? If you look at just the revenue, LinkedIn makes $7 billion from talent services, which is to say it makes $7 billion off of employers, and it makes $1.7 billion in revenue off of premium subscribers, right? I.e. candidates mostly. Um, just under that paradigm, it's clear where their priorities are going to lie, that fraction of the time. That is not to, sort of cast aspersions or to, necessarily say that they're like, doing it with bad intent, but it's just to say, as someone that runs a business, if that's how your money comes in, that's how your priorities are going to be, right? And I think that is unfortunately where, it has set up a system where it is really great for employers to be able to farm large amounts of candidates to get the basic information for candidates that they can like reach out to them and connect to them, because ultimately the point of the system is to give employers easy access to a large pool of candidates and give them relatively cut and dried ways of slicing and dicing them into a small group of selected kind of shortlisted individuals, right? That they can then take and like kind of run off with. I think the problem is that like because that's weaved in with a social network that's ostensibly supposed to help you move ahead in your career, the expectation is that using LinkedIn would be a net good, whereas I think you very eloquently pointed out the many ways in which LinkedIn can actually be a burden on people. And to the extent that like we all live in a world where you necessarily need to have a LinkedIn and it necessarily needs to be of a certain quality, yes, it is totally burdensome, right? I think at the same time, it is just best viewed as at minimum the cost of doing business, and thinking of those optimizations to your LinkedIn profile as part of a larger sort of, like it's just like the resume. It's just another thing that I do to sort of get myself really aligned. And so, what I would encourage your viewership to do is to, if you're gearing up for a job search or you're job searching, you feel like, you're not doing it well, you're not doing it effectively, is to, essentially just pause and really ask yourself, hey, am I like actually ready to be applying, right? Have I talked through my stuff? Have I developed my stories? Have I set up my LinkedIn? Am I like representing myself effectively on this tool that is not really set up for me to succeed, right? So I'm like showing the exact slice of myself that employers want. Another thing that's really unfair, even though it's total bullshit, you're basically just arbitrarily listing skills on your profile, but that makes a difference, right? Because when you apply through LinkedIn, it is weighted to consider how many skills from the ones you selected overlap with the job description, right? And so there's an extent to which it's just a necessary evil, and so that's how I would encourage people to view it is, just be pragmatic and sort of get it up to scratch to the extent that's necessary.
What would you say? Just I'm someone that likes to be a bit rebellious. I typically try to stand out on the things that I don't agree with. I think that's kind of what my whole channel is based on, is pointing out the ridiculousness of what's happening. Um, I made the conscious decision I'm not going to have a LinkedIn because I don't want to decide that it wasn't a price that I was willing to pay. But what I'm curious is how much does that actually cost me? Is it making truly a big difference, or is it one of those things that's maybe like a 10% differentiator?
I think it is. I think it almost honestly, like without trying to be like overly philosophical about it, it's like a question about human conformity, right? Like how much do we like how would we view someone that sticks out like a sore thumb by choosing not to participate in the LinkedIn industrial complex is almost what I'm thinking, right? Would be the reflex. I think in some ways, is it better than having a shitty LinkedIn profile? Yes. So I would say if you're gonna not put in the effort, or if you're gonna do something really reductive, then it's better to just not have it. I know that's not what you were saying, but I just want to throw that out there as a potential scenario in case that gives someone an out. I also think that like maybe for folks that are in more sort of like networking oriented fields, it may be a little bit harder. Like if you're I don't know, if you're yeah, I've done PR. I know PR is like very relationship based. So if you're in like PR or if you're in public policy, my wife is in public policy. It's a very, government policy is very relationship based. I think there's certain professions where you just maybe don't have the luxury to do that as much. Um, I think I think maybe the a good middle ground, maybe if someone's willing to do it, would be to like have it spun up maybe for the purposes of a job search. But again, I know that that can kind of be self-defeating. I think the fairest answer is it a little bit depends on your field. Like I would say right now as a CEO, there's in theory I could get away with not having a LinkedIn, right? Because I don't necessarily need to network in the same to like get a job, quote unquote, in the same way that a lot of other folks do. So yeah. But I do I will lastly say I sympathize with the rebelliousness. Like that part I feel, which is why it hurts me to go against that myself. But again, just in the spirit of trying to be productive for your audience.
Well, and something that it wasn't that I also just rebelled and said just not going to do it. I decided to LinkedIn was originally created to be a networking platform, and I think that's not even what it's meant for anymore. But
And actually, to your point, you're actually taking a principled stance, right? Like you're going out there, you're talking about it, you're putting it forward, you are like presenting a coherent thesis for why LinkedIn is not good for humanity on some level. I will also say that I appreciate that distinction. But sorry for interrupting you. Go ahead.
No, 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 it's all good. What I was gonna say though is when it was interesting. I haven't had a LinkedIn for a very long time. I had to create one because I was gonna pull some of the clips for my video. But when I made that video, something inside of me clicked that said, I'm going to start networking in person. And I went to a men's group and I've started just having this. If I saw someone like at the gym or something and they were wearing like a hat, it was a veteran that was wearing a hat. I just went up to him and I said, thank you for your service. It's these little things that I started to do to kind of put myself out there a little bit more. The amount of success, not necessarily job orientated because I'm not looking for a job, but in terms of connections that I've been building, in terms of hearing other people's life stories, of putting things towards my own videos, has been instrumental in just what has been a month and a half. Do you mind elaborating maybe on the importance of personal connection, of how people can do that effectively? It's kind of a hard thing to do, and there's not great guidance on that, I don't believe.
No, no. So you are so spot on, and this is the, in all the research that we do and all the recruiters that we speak to, the number one thing that folks are sort of saying gets you alpha, quote unquote, in the job search and in career progression is networking now, right? And so I know it's almost a trope, right? We've been talking about networking as long as we've had like desk jobs, but I think in a world where, there's auto apply and people, ATS systems being overstuffed with applicants and, referrals being over prioritized and all these, like, there's more and more reasons why the traditional channels are being overstuffed by noise. And therefore, the stuff that really stands out as signal amidst that noise is the warm introduction, is the personal vouching, right? One thing that a lot of folks don't know is a lot of companies actually have referral programs where they give you, as an existing employee, a bounty in fact, I believe there's an app that you could look up. I forget what it's called, that you can look up that actually tells you which companies have those reward systems so you can network with folks there specifically. So just Google that, look it up. But if you network with someone there and you kind of persuade them that you would be a reasonably hireable candidate, it's in their interest to refer you, right? They get literal hundreds, if not $1,000 out of it almost. So that's one thing to sort of bear, one another reason to bear in mind the power of personal connections. I think where folks again fail is they try to mass apply, like mass message, and it is really the kind of thing that you have to curate, right? So again, to provide your audience with a little bit of guidance, like sort of my top tips for how to, create a good engaging sort of networking message. I think step one is know your person, right? And find a thing that makes a connection between you and that person, right? So when I reached out to you, I'd seen your video. I spent a few minutes sort of like jotting down my thoughts and sort of refining like what it is that I liked about your POV on LinkedIn and what it was that I felt like, sort of aligned with what I was thinking, and then had a call to action at the end, which is like, hey, it would be good to like jump on and chat, right? It wasn't especially complicated workflow. It was just, do a little bit of research, find a point of connection, flesh that out, write it out, or even throw it into ChatGPT, call to action, you're good to go, right? And then, especially for folks that are looking for a job, as long as you don't, just immediately lead with, hey, can you refer me? Maybe you start with, can I get to know your company? Can I get to know your team? Maybe can I just learn about, your industry? Try to break in, try to show an interest in these folks, try to ask them about something about their experiences or their achievements. And, folks are generally really willing to talk about themselves. And so if you give folks an opportunity to sort of share their experiences and show genuine interest, I'm not saying everyone will respond to your networking message, but even a 1 in 5 or 1 in 10 response rate is amazing because that one conversation can really pay off, And that's, as I always tell my clients, all you need is one. All you need is one to pay off, right? And so that's what we're working towards for ourselves.
And something that I would like to elaborate on too, uh, in regards to the personal connection, away from an online setting, so actually in person, um, to really show how much one interaction can change. I went to Wells Fargo. That's where my parents banked. I went there because it was time for me to start building my credit after I graduated high school. Went there, walked in, absolutely couldn't stand it. I thought it was the worst place ever. I had another bank account with the bank. So then I go in there. The gentleman sits me down. I kind of explain what it is that I'm looking for. We start talking. Um, really great conversation. I ended up getting declined for the credit card, but he said, I actually really like, I had a really good conversation with you. Do you think that you would be interested in working here? I said, oh, I thought that you had to have a degree to work at a bank. And so I said, yeah. So what do I do? And he said, just go to, the website. And I applied and I ended up, had an interview scheduled. I showed up a day early in pouring rain at the wrong location. So I walk across this parking lot, I get soaked, but it just so happened that in that location I went to had the district manager with all of the branch managers. So I ended up having an interview with them. They went and talked to all of the district manager as well as all the branch managers. Said that I did a good job. I ended up getting hired at that main location, and the banker came to me and he said, "It's so great to see you here." I said, "Oh yeah, yeah, thank you." He's like, I've told almost 100 people that they should apply, and none of them ever actually did. You were the only one." And one of the things that happened when I did another interview with the branch manager at that location was he said, "I want to hear about your personal skills." And I told him, I said, my background has been in the restaurant industry. So I'll be honest, I don't know anything about banking, but I do know how to be able to communicate with people. And I said, I still remember and I still speak with the people that used to come into the Chinese restaurant. Like a guy, I still remember his name's Stanley. He would call it General Toe's chicken, no broccoli, because his wife had cancer and the medicine she was on couldn't handle the broccoli. And so I would see him, or a lady that she was a janitor for the high school, and she would come in, and her treat was every Friday she would get the lemon chicken, and she loved it. And I said that to the branch manager, and that was the moment I knew that I got hired. But what I'm really trying to elaborate on is the importance of actually investing into the personal connection. The way that I excelled in my job was I memorized everybody's name. And maybe I wouldn't, it's sometimes it's hard, but I'll remember like Jack Smith or whatever drives a black Suburban, and he typically comes in through the drive-through. So remember when I see the black Suburban coming around, Mr. Smith, it's good to see you. The amount of connections that I built doing that, the way that I was able to move up so quickly through the company, was just investing in the personal connection. And that is what's completely changed my life. If it wasn't for that one, being at the right place at the right time, but also being authentic, saying, I don't know how to do this, but I do have some skills and I'm going to put my best foot forward. So I think that's worth elaborating on a bit because we're in a time that does feel certainly hopeless. I know that at that period of time, I felt hopeless. All my friends were going to college. I didn't know what I was going to do. I was working at the local grocery store, had no money. It was awful. But because I continuously kept putting my best foot forward, trying to do the best that I could, and really valuing every time somebody was in front of me, it didn't matter if they had a ton of money or no money. It's a human being. What value can I provide to them?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that is so the absolute right attitude, and it's a grind, right? Like clearly what you're describing, and total credit to you. It sounds like such a grind that you kind of stayed with day in and day out without any sort of like, I think what's really cool is that you came to realize this really important principle about networking and about human relationships. You sort of intuited it and you used it to such great success, and you intuited it and used it to great success without any sort of guarantee of a payoff, right? I think that is incredibly cool, and I think it speaks to exactly as you said, the power of human relationships. I think in a world where, I mean, how many times have we, you hear the word AI in a day, right? In a world filled with AI, the human element is going to matter more and more, right? And actually, I would argue your ability to convey your humanity is going to matter more and more, and your authenticity and what sort of makes you as an individual. And so, the thing that I would sort of tell folks in terms of making themselves future proof, because my co-founder is very involved in sort of studies at Harvard's Ed School, and does a lot of work on the future of the workforce and what it's going to look like. And one of the main conclusions that she's drawn in sort of her research and sort of her work in that field is really realizing that self-advocacy, the ability to put yourself forward, the ability to know what you bring to the table and then to communicate that effectively is going to be the most important meta skill there is, right? What I really loved about that answer you gave that about branch manager is you immediately knew, okay, well, again, you intuited what's the right way to go about this. To be honest and upfront about my limitations is to be really clear about the value that I can bring to the table, and then, just sort of underscore that through like good communication and sort of good presence in the context of that interview. And that's all it boils down to. That's sort of the best that you can do. And so, again, I would say, for the folks out there, you're going to job hunt a lot in your life. you're gonna do this motion a lot. Even when you're not job hunting, you're gonna be doing performance reviews. I think it would be really great if everyone, whether that's using CareerSpan or not, but I would say for your own sake, develop the habit and the reflex and the instinct to reflect on your professional experiences, to start reflecting on your skills, to more consciously articulate, the things that you're good at, the things that you're bad at, and to do that with confidence and with pride, and to feel good about it when you do that, because we all deserve to feel good about the things that we've done. We all, deserve to sort of feel that dignity and that value in the work that we do. And it just, I think we both feel very strongly about how the job market sort of strips that away from people. And so, in lieu of the world giving you that through validation in the job market, it is really important to keep yourself motivated, stay positive, stay confident, and to do that yourself.
I would like to hear your thoughts for someone that is graduating high school, doesn't want to go to college, doesn't know what they want to do, but they just want to try to make an impact. What are some things that they can start grabbing onto? What are some ways that they can begin to give themselves the best shot of hopefully getting some sort of job?
Okay, so that's great. I think first of all, we live in a new paradigm, and so I actually really am supportive of this young person, taking a good hard look at, is college the best option? Is a technical vocational school the best option? Is time away sort of getting real world experience, is that feasible? Because I know that's often a function of privilege and not always something folks can do. But if that is, within your grasp, is that maybe something that's more appropriate for you? Is it, I think a lot of the times one of the big mistakes folks make, especially when they commit to higher education, is not knowing, or even commit to a particular career path, is not having done the, again, the internal stock take of what are the things I value and care about and motivate me and drive me. And so I think that sort of, again, not to beat a dead horse, I think that's the self-reflection part that we've sort of discussed a lot and sort of worth doing. I think beyond that, it is just honestly something you touched on, which is just going out and doing it. Like, oh, I would like to do X, go out and do it, right? Or not even that. Maybe sometimes that's too hard, right? Let's say you're interested in public relations, right? Start simple. Literally ask yourself, go to your mom and your dad, say, hey, do I know anyone? Go to your aunt and your uncle, anyone in your family, do you know anyone in public relations, right? I'm not saying they will, I'm saying start there, right? Okay, that didn't work. Then go into your second degree of your network, right? Go into your school. Either go into your high school, maybe you have an English teacher, a communications teacher, maybe you have a career counselor, maybe you have a principal, maybe you have some other family friends that are in different areas. Like, look beyond your sort of immediate circle, see if someone over there knows someone in that field, right? That doesn't work. That's okay. Get on LinkedIn, right? Maybe get, scrounge up like the $25. I know it's extortionate how much LinkedIn charges. Get premium for a month, develop a good sort of networking strategy, look up folks, that are second degree or third degree connections, get better at writing cold outreach emails, start reaching out to them. Say, hey, I'd like to learn about PR. I'd like to learn what it means to do PR in New York or SF. Can I have a conversation? This is who I am. This is why I'm interested. Again, maybe 1 in 10 people will answer you, but that person will give you great insights into what it really means to do PR. They will give you an opportunity to ask questions that you may not have gotten anywhere before, right? You can use all sort of cool AI tools now like Perplexity and Claude to get some other, kind of other cool insights into fields. But by and large, that human element is always going to be important, right? So I would say start simple and just, if you're interested in something, don't just say you're interested in, start taking first few steps to move in that direction. And the moment you realize, no, this isn't for me, that's okay. Drop it. Move on. I think the most important thing young people can do early on is explore, right? You don't have to settle on anything, but you do have to consciously and in a systematic and intelligent and self-aware fashion, you should explore things that interest you and pay attention to what you like or don't like and slowly move towards, a direction that sort of, takes you in your final career path.
I think you're absolutely right, and something that I would also want to say is, um, feel free if you have someone that you like to listen to on YouTube or Spotify or Instagram, reach out to them, but do it in, not like a, hey bro, like your stuff, but maybe send them an email of really like what it is that you're doing. I'm thinking about doing this, blah 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 blah. Keep it somewhat concise, don't ramble forever, and then do like a call to action. Would you be interested in doing a call? And I've had a lot of people that I've done calls with that I had no idea what we were going to talk about, but if you're going to send me an email and it's well presented, I would love to talk to you. And that's kind of the way that and I think other people, some people are too busy, and there's times that I don't always get back quickly, but um, I think that people like that. I think people want to help, and people want to ultimately be able to serve another person. So that's just kind of what I wanted to add onto that as well.
Totally, totally. And like, I'll give some easy examples, right? Like before I am I like to be really honest about a lot of my shortcomings and the mistakes I've made in the job application space. One, because it keeps me humble as a career coach. I think two, because I think they're like instructive that even someone that does this for a living and like at various points of his life was doing it very intentionally with others, when it comes to doing it for themselves, makes a lot of the same mistakes, right? And so I can't tell you the number of like outreach messages I've sent, that I immediately regretted. And then I think back and I'm like, oh, it's because I was like desperate and scared, and I found this dude on Coursera that went to my university, and I was like, this is my chance to go to Coursera, and I just wrote out this like silly email, in the heat of the moment, and then I regretted it, right? And so it's like obviously not something that I would, when I have the benefit of objectivity and not being the person doing the thing, it's very easy for me to say, "Hey, you probably should have done that, buddy." But so I'm super empathetic of that, the fact that we're under a lot of pressure. It's so easy to sort of succumb to our anxieties and sort of pull the trigger on sort of suboptimal things that hurt you in the long run. But I think the most beneficial thing for someone to have when they're applying for jobs is just the mindset, right? Is to stay calm, is to stay confident, is to, regularly remind themselves about why they're qualified, is to engage in both short-term and long-term networking. So short-term networking being the stuff to get you a job right now, long-term networking being, planting those seeds so that, if you want to work at Microsoft, that's your dream, maybe start by introducing yourself to some people in Microsoft today, right? Maybe it's not going to be your next job or the job after that, but really if you do care about your career and you want to be proactive, then plant those seeds today. And I think that's the sort of thing that I'll sort of, you know, uh leave with your audience is I think the world is moving towards a place where we have to be more proactive when it comes to our career, not reactive. And so the more folks can, again, whether that's using a tool like CareerSpan or just through their own sort of effort, the more they can plan in advance, not just work on their career when they're job hunting, but work on their career a little bit all the time. I think that is a much better, more productive, more relaxed sort of world for them to be in. And so that's sort of the mindset shift that I highly encourage folks to take when they are thinking about their careers.
Mm, yeah, I absolutely agree. Something that it made me think of is something that we're not talking about as a society is actually the amount of boomers and Gen X that are getting fired and are having an impossible time coming back into the job market. It's something that I've started thinking about more, but I would love to hear what are your thoughts on that. What is going on with that, and then what are ways that they can be able to try to give themselves the best shot at getting a job or avoiding that situation.
No, it's so unfortunate. It's really each I feel like it's so funny. Each generation is kind of getting screwed in their own unique way. Like we spoke about Gen Z and some of the critiques that folks have about, towards them. I think it's tough that Gen Xers and boomers and whatnot are sort of struggling with the ageism concerns, right? And are really being sort of, discounted by folks when in fact I would argue that, certainly with Gen X, but also with boomers, being able to see some of the evolution of technology and sort of how technologies have come about actually could make you more equipped to sort of deal with AI in some ways, right? But I think leaving aside the specifics, I think it's going to be a thing about perception, right? I think again to stay aligned with my like hyper pragmatic points that I've made over the course of this podcast, I would say if you are in that generational bracket, I would say regardless of like, how let's say tech savvy or future forward or whatever you actually are, I think it behooves you to put yourself forward that way, or at least ask yourself, hey, am I coming across as a relatively modern candidate, right? I think partially that may involve sort of speaking to colleagues or trusted individuals that are maybe younger than you, maybe recruiters that are a little bit younger than you that sort of have a pulse on sort of what the, especially since, operating on the assumption that older folks have been in their position for longer and therefore are less familiar with sort of the rules of the road in the job market. I think that might be one thing to sort of keep an eye out for. But I think more broadly, the way that you communicate that is to show that you're, taking on certificates, learning new things, taking on new responsibilities at work, ideally that you are, sort of progressing in terms of your titles, just showing that sort of upward progression and showing, maybe even referencing new technologies in the keywords. It's kind of a cheap way to do it, but I think it still counts because again, there's an extent to which it is perception that needs to be accounted for before even reality, when it comes to the practicality of getting hired.
Mm. Yeah, well, thank you for discussing that. I'm sure that at some point I'll make a video that'll go back since the dawn of time of why this happened. But
Well, I love
yeah,
I love those explorations, right? Like it's so I like that you bring a sort of like psychological and almost anthropological lens to this stuff because I think sometimes when you see how these systems came about, it helps you realize that it's not me that sucks. It is like the system sucks, right? But and we know intuitively that the system sucks, but often because we don't know the many ways in which why the system sucks, it's very easy to feel like we are the ones that suck, right? And I constantly tell folks, even if you're not having a lot of success in the job market, it could just be that you are like a couple of things away from it working out great, right? Like you're just, a couple of tweaking a few things away from getting a lot more cut through. And so I know it sucks. I know it's annoying. I know I've thrown like 1,000 tips people's way today, and I'll try to sort of distill that and get you that document with a lot of them summarized. But I think that's just unfortunately or fortunately the reality is it is a lot of work to keep up with, but for the folks that are willing to put in the effort in a sort of regular, systematic way, there are still a lot of opportunities out there and a lot of ways to stand out in a crowd.
as you are, the CEO for this company, do you mind elaborating a little bit on yourself, on how you got started in this, and why this is something that you feel passionate about?
Sure, yeah, absolutely. So, I have a little bit of a all over the place background. So I'm Indian originally, went to international school, then went to college in the US, got to experience what it meant like, what it was like to sort of experience American college life, but also sort of get that introduction to all of the pressures of, white collar sort of existence in the US. I come from a fairly privileged background. Both my parents are doctors in India. But one of the interesting things was, despite, sort of having that sort of upper middle class existence, I often experience a lot of the same problems that a lot of folks in the U.S. I would argue the bulk of folks in the U.S. faced, which was, my dad couldn't tell me how to write a resume. My mom couldn't tell me how to write a cover letter. I don't really have family that had worked in sort of, big companies in the US. And so, to the extent that, a lot of the stuff I had to figure out on my own, it gave me a really deep, sort of appreciation for this, what my co-founder calls this hidden curriculum, this stuff that, these rules of the road that were kind of all expected to know, because it so drastically affects how we move forward in our professional lives, and especially in America, where professional identity is so tied with like our like personal identity. But anyway, experienced that in the US, moved to Singapore for a couple of years, started doing coaching, really grew a deep appreciation for, just how wonderful it is to work with someone one on one, to really learn about their background. That's really where me and my co founder came to really believe that the best way to help someone with their career is to, just be available to them, to ask them really good questions, to help them evolve their own thinking. And, we went our separate ways for a couple of years. I got my MBA at Cornell, worked at McKinsey for a year. And then when ChatGPT launched, actually literally the day ChatGPT launched, I sort of had, kind of a day off, and was, just had sort of the idea of the company sort of formulate in my head, wrote this like 4,000 word like essay to my co-founder the same day, and was like, we got to start a company. And it just, 2 years later, here we are, trying to make this work. But the whole time, the thing that's really motivated us has been, how do we, there's a million articles out there about how to write your resume. People still need help, right? There's a million articles out there about how to build your professional brand. People still need help. And, I think our sort of insight into the market is that, can we use AI to bridge that gap, right? Instead of generative AI, I like to call it sort of facilitative AI. Can we use AI to enable, that half step that gets you to close that cognitive gap, and sort of help you, do that self-reflection in sort of the full way as though a human was helping you. And so that's sort of what motivates us. And, from that sort of cool, what I would like to think is a cool sort of concept, we've built out a broader vision for a company that, helps you build a great career over the course of your career. That's why we're called CareerSpan. But that's sort of my spiel, and sort of what makes me the character that I am today.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for elaborating on that. Something I could tell immediately when we had one of our first mini conversations was that you were authentic, you were genuine, and you live a life of service, which I think is incredibly important. That's whole point of this channel. That's what it is that I do in my life. So thank you again for coming on here, for sharing. I think that you gave the most practical tips that I've heard in a podcast, or anything in a very long time. So yeah, thank you again so much, and I look forward to our next conversation.
Absolutely my pleasure. Back anytime you want me.
And just before filming the podcast, I had the pleasure of speaking with both Vrijen as well as his co founder to really get a better sense of what the company is, as well as their intentions of the difference they're trying to make. While I do believe that at some point we will have the discussion of the channel potentially representing the brand, I just wanted to share this with you all. I wanted you to see if it actually provides value to you. So there will be a link in the description or the pinned comment section below. I will not be receiving any financial benefit. It is entirely just to test the product, as well as I believe in the product. I've used it myself. I thought that it provided value. And especially, I really do like Vrijen as well as his co founder. I think that they truly do have good intentions. So I just wanted to keep transparency there with you. This is the first company or first brand that I've ever discussed on the channel. And transparency means the absolute most to me, as well as authenticity. So thank you all so much for your time. Until next time, bye bye.